Welcome to Tesse Talks with your host, Tesse Akpeki, and co-host me, Paula Okoni. This is a special edition because there are times in our life that we want to mark certain milestones, and this is certainly one of them. Today we're going to be talking and remembering Tesse's older brother, Tony Akpeki, who passed away tragically in December of 2020. 2 years ago, in 2021, we did a recording in which we remembered him. But today, we want to look back to where Tesse was at that stage and where she is today. And because I know she's a Christian, as I am, I know that she believes it was God who helped her through those difficult moments in the last 2.5 years. So, Tesse, the floor's yours.
Thank you, Paula. I always refer to you as my favorite co-host, favorite and only. Anyway, it's always a joy to be here, and I'm so pleased that we can return to celebrate the life of special Tony, a handsome, lovely, generous, kind, clever, wise, insightful man. And I'm not biased at all in saying that. When Tony was tragically mowed down in Dover by a drug addicted driver, my life, our lives as a family fell apart. There were children, 4 children, who were left without a father, a wife left without a husband, a family left without a brother, and a lot of cousins left without an uncle, and friends left without one of their dearest bosom friends. So there was a whole trail of losses, and worse still, it happened during COVID-19 because Tony was a key worker collecting COVID samples when he was killed. And at that point in time, really, I didn't think I could go on. I mean, sometimes it was hard to breathe. Often I didn't want to get out of bed. And more often I just didn't feel a reason to go on, really, a reason to get up the next day and continue. How was I going to live when one of the people I loved most in my life had just seemed to disappear? One minute he was there, the other minute he wasn't. And I think for people who haven't faced the experience of sudden death, whether that's by suicide or a car crash, which is like what happened to us, or something like that, people don't realize the trauma of that fragility when somebody just disappears out of your life. So I felt all kinds of emotions. It was a roller coaster. It was depression. It was sometimes I had a dream, and in my dream he's there, and then I wake up and he's not, which made me more upset, and I didn't want to go to sleep just in case the dream reoccurred. I still have the dream now, not as often, but I still have that dream, and just being in tears day and night, and just this sense of emptiness and loneliness, and just a roller coaster of that emotion, which was not helped by having a court case, because the person who did it was caught, and we went to the magistrate court to start off with, and the Crown Court in Canterbury. And it was just such an awful, awful, depressing time. And all I can summarize it as is a light went out in my life. That's how I can summarize it. The light went out.
But something has happened. And this is 2.5 years later. And there's a spring in your step. And that's why you wanted to do this recording. Can you tell us about that? Can you share that with your listeners? What happened to change you?
Everything, and thanks for that very insightful question, very empathetic and very connecting. What has changed is I'm at the different stage of my journey now, of my grief journey. And time doesn't bring the person back. In fact, time takes me closer to my lovely brother. But what was useful in this journey was to come across people that specialize in grief, like David Kessler, who has written a lot of books, and he's actually had a whole program and has an online um, support group called Tender Hearts, as in tender and heart. And people like Lisa Richard, who does grief work, and Jane Duncan Rogers, who also does death planning and wants death plan to be as common as birth plans. And having these people and reading a lot of books on this subject has really helped me to gather more insight, as well as having what I'd call grief travelers and people who are fellow supporters in this space. Now, not everybody is able to be supportive in people during their grief. And there's no blame, no shame in that. But what I sense is that when you have a person or a group of people who come alongside you and actually just travel with you. Sometimes they ask questions, sometimes they don't, they're silent. Sometimes they're the people who bring that meal and say, have you eaten today? That somehow normalizes this really dark side of life. You know, when a baby is born and baby's healthy and all those sorts of things, there's joy, there's light. But death and dying is not always that kind of experience. End of life, particularly end of life that was not planned. That's what I would call death by not by choice. That period is when you sense the essence of people who can connect with that pain and not run away from it. And I think for me, that is what changed, that I felt that if I just hung in there, one heartbeat at a time, one moment at a time, then somehow I would find an inner strength to ride the wave of loss.
Very well said. Especially that word or that phrase of loss. Or did you say grief travelers?
Grief travelers,
Grief
yeah.
travelers, yeah. Because
Yeah.
we know that road is well traveled.
Yeah.
There's death all around us, death happening every time, but it's
Yeah.
still hard.
Yeah.
And so I know one of the things you haven't spoken about it, but I want to throw some light on it, is that you do have a IG program in which you talk a lot about not death in particular, but you write poems, you you do videos that are very encouraging. Would you be able to I wanted to ask you about some encouraging tips that you can give to people who have traveled that same journey. And I specifically made reference to your IG channel because it's full of encouraging poems and talks and things that you've discovered along the way. And I personally, as a follower of yours there, has seen the transformation. So can you talk about, give any encouraging tips to some of our listeners?
Paula, you can tell from my smile that was not planned at all. And I guess you're talking about my blog, my personal blog called Smiley Tesse.
Your
And
IG on
yeah,
IG.
yeah, and IG and Instagram is a wonderful place, and young people who you know and who you encourage me to start from, with Smiley Tessie, because I was so sad. And I think the encouraging thing is that sometimes names matter, because I wasn't smiling at the time I started
Yes.
it, and the young people said, Auntie Tessie, you can have a voice through this, and they branded me and they named me, and I was Smiley Tessie, and actually I begun to smile again. And the difference between the smile that I have now is it's an inner smile. It actually, by blogging through Instagram, I something began to happen from within, and I discovered my inner poet. I've always liked poetry, but my poetry had stopped. It dried up many, many years. I'd never written anything. And as I began to do posts on Smiley Tesse, somehow this poetry was birthed. It was just like sometimes I'd be crying, like really sobbing, and just wrenching, holding my stomach, and yet these words would flow. So somehow it was like I found expression in my poetry, and I found expression through speaking out the word, but also I found expression through the visual pictures or the video clips, which became part of that blogging. And because I know you joined me, and there was you and there was me. And there was about 2 other people. So we started from like 3 or 4. And now I think it's just grown, and it's a few hundred now. I think we're almost 300 from just 3 or 4. So it's really, it's humbling when you start from 1 or 2, and then you grow to 100, and then you go to 200, and then you get to 300. But I think something very magical happened. And that magic was about putting the pain of the loss into words. And I think that putting into words a universal sense of grief, of loss, connected with other people. It resonated with other people. And I sense that people are connecting with Smiley Tesse because somehow that reflection of my heart is something they can connect with for them. They may have lost a friend or a wife or a partner or, a friend or a pet. They could have lost something. And when I write my poetry, or I pick up poetry that other people have written and find a way of visualizing that, they connect with that. And I'm very, very proud of that space, because in that space, I feel that it's beyond words. There's love, there's compassion, there's hope, there's optimism, and there is that sense of grief, and that grief is okay. Because as we travel through the pathway of grief and loss and trauma, as we go through that pathway, if somehow we can ride the waves of that loss, at some point there's love, and at some point there's joy. I didn't say happiness, because happiness may not come. Joy as a core emotion may, but it cannot be reached authentically or vulnerably without going through that pathway of grief. And that's not a pretty, pretty journey at all.
Wow. Very well said. And as you can hear, folks, I mean, this is Tesse. The poetry just bubbled up through her. And what I got from looking at how she grieved, but shared through her giving through her grief on Smiley Tesse, was that she was sharing. She was, it took her out from herself, and she was able to talk to the rest of the world through her poems, through her writings, through her expressions, because she's a very expressive person. And so through giving, she gained, and we gained. So I want to encourage so many of you who are probably grieving at this time to go check out her Instagram page. It's Smiley_Tesse or Tesse_.
It's Smiley Tesse _.
Smiley Tesse_.
Yeah.
You'd be amazed at what you see there.